Maybe losers shouldn't travel with successful people, my daughter-in-law said after canceling my flight. Vanessa did not whisper it. She said it clearly enough for the airline agent, the couple behind us, and my 16-year-old granddaughter to hear. For a moment, no one moved. The departure screens above the counter kept changing. Suitcase wheels rattled across the polished floor. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. I stood at the check-in desk at John Glenn Columbus International Airport with one hand resting on the handle of the blue suitcase my late husband, Richard, had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I had packed it carefully the night before, folding each dress between sheets of tissue paper the way he used to tease me about. We were supposed to fly to Maui that morning. I had planned the trip to honor what would have been Richard's 72nd birthday. I had paid for the hotel, the rental car, and most of the airfare using the travel points he had spent years saving. Yet the airline agent was looking at me with the cautious expression people use when they know they are about to deliver bad news. "Mrs. Collins," she said gently, "your reservation was canceled at 5:14 this morning."
Ich sagte her.
Canceled by whom? Vanessa adjusted the strap of her cream-colored handbag and glanced toward the security line. My son Daniel checked his watch. He did not look confused. That was the first thing I noticed. A man who had just learned his mother's ticket had vanished, should have asked questions. Daniel only sighed. "Mom, we don't have time for this. Boarding starts in 40 minutes. My ticket was part of the same reservation," I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. Someone had to request the cancellation. Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Maybe you clicked something and forgot. These apps can be confusing at your age." I was 68, not helpless. I had managed a dental office for 26 years, balanced payroll, handled insurance claims, and organized every family vacation since Daniel was 9. Vanessa knew that. Her comment was not an explanation. It was a performance. Emily stood a few feet away, gripping the handle of her.
"Carry on."
Her eyes moved from her mother to me, then down to the floor. She looked embarrassed, but not surprised. That was the second thing I noticed. The agent typed quickly, then leaned closer to her screen. The request came through online. The refund was issued as a travel credit. Vanessa's face changed for less than a second. Her smile remained, but her shoulders stiffened. Daniel reached for her suitcase. "We need to go." I waited for him to say something else.
He could have offered to stay.
He could have asked the agent to put me on the next flight. He could have looked at me and seen the woman who had paid his college tuition, watched his daughter after school, and covered the down payment on his first home. Instead, he said, "Call a cab, Mom. We'll figure it out when we get back." Then he followed his wife toward security. Emily looked over her shoulder once. Vanessa did not. I watched all three of them disappear behind the checkpoint while my suitcase remained beside my shoes. I did not cry. I did not call after them. I asked the agent to print the cancellation record. She hesitated, then slid a single sheet of paper across the counter. At the bottom was the time of the request, the device used to submit it, and the email address connected to the account. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Vanessa. I folded the paper once, placed it inside my purse, and understood that my missing flight was not an accident. It was a plan. I left the airport carrying the same suitcase I had brought in, but it felt heavier on the way out. The morning sun had already climbed above the parking garage, casting bright lines across the concrete while families hurried past me with boarding passes in their hands. I called a taxi and sat in the back seat without speaking. The driver asked whether my flight had been delayed. I told him there had been a change of plans. 3 weeks earlier, the trip had still felt like a gift I was giving to all of us. Richard had spoken about Maui for years. He had visited once during his time in the Navy and remembered the smell of the ocean, the warm rain, and the sunrise over Haleakala more clearly than places we had traveled together. On what would have been his 72nd birthday, I wanted to stand beside the water and remember him somewhere beautiful. Daniel said it sounded meaningful. Vanessa said it sounded expensive. Then, after I explained that I would cover most of the cost, her tone changed. She called me twice that evening with hotel suggestions, restaurant lists, and photographs of private villas with wide balconies. I had planned to use the travel points Richard and I had saved for nearly 15 years. There were enough points for 4 round-trip tickets and several nights at a comfortable hotel near the beach. I also set aside money from my savings for the rental car, meals, and a small memorial dinner. By the end of the first week, Vanessa had upgraded nearly everything. She said the original hotel looked dated. She insisted that Daniel needed a larger room because he worked hard and deserved to relax. She added a beachfront excursion, a luxury sport utility vehicle, and dinner reservations at places where the price of one meal was more than I usually spent on groceries in 2 weeks. Each time I questioned the cost, she reminded me that Richard would have wanted the family to enjoy itself. She spoke about my husband as though she had known his wishes better than I did. I told myself not to be difficult. I told myself grief had made me protective of every dollar and every detail. When the final charges reached almost $24,000, I stared at the total for a long time before approving it. That amount included cash, points, and the balance placed on my travel card. Vanessa promised she would send me a complete itinerary.
She never did.
Instead, she forwarded pieces of information one at a time. A flight number, a hotel address, a reservation time. She said it was easier if one person handled everything. Daniel agreed. He always agreed, when agreeing meant avoiding an argument with his wife. 2 days before departure, I learned that my seat had been moved away from the others. Vanessa blamed the airline. The night before we left, she texted to remind me not to bring too much luggage because no one wanted to wait for an older woman at baggage claim. I read the message twice, then placed my phone face down on the kitchen table. I still went to bed believing the trip mattered more than her rudeness. At home after the airport, I carried my suitcase upstairs and left it unopened beside the bedroom door. The house was silent. Richard's photograph stood on the dresser, the one taken on our 40th anniversary. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and signed into the travel account. The reservation page loaded slowly. My canceled ticket appeared first. Beneath it was a line I had not seen before. The refund had not returned to my card. It had been converted into a travel credit and applied to an upgraded suite in Vanessa's name. I scrolled farther. Another charge appeared below it for $8,600. The description read Private Oceanfront Villa. I had never approved a villa. I printed the page and placed it beside the cancellation record from the airport. Then I looked at Richard's photograph again. They had not simply removed me from the trip I planned for him. They had used my money to celebrate my absence. For several minutes, I sat at the desk without touching the keyboard. The 2 printed pages rested beneath my hands, one showing the canceled ticket and the other showing the villa charge. The numbers were clean and ordinary. That made them worse. Betrayal did not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it appeared as a confirmation number, a timestamp, or a charge placed quietly on someone else's account. I opened the email folder where Vanessa had sent the travel details and began reading every message from the previous 3 weeks. The pattern became clear almost immediately. She had not simply organized the trip. She had been removing me from it one decision at a time. The first hotel I selected had 2 adjoining rooms and an elevator close to the lobby. Vanessa rejected it because she said the property looked old-fashioned. The resort she chose placed her family in an oceanfront suite while my room was listed in a separate building across the property. When I asked why we were not staying near each other, she said Daniel needed privacy and Emily needed space. I accepted the answer. because I did not want to sound demanding. Then I found the seating confirmation. Our original reservation placed all four of us in the same row. 2 days later, Vanessa moved my seat to the last row of the airplane, beside the restroom, while upgrading herself and Daniel to extra legroom seats near the front. She told me the airline had made the change. The account history showed otherwise. Her email address had requested it. I kept reading. The memorial dinner for Richard had originally been scheduled for the evening of his birthday. I had chosen a quiet restaurant overlooking the water and asked the staff whether they could place one white flower at his empty seat. Vanessa canceled that reservation and replaced it with a private dinner for two under her name and Daniel's. She moved the family meal to a casual restaurant the following afternoon, then wrote that I should not expect everyone to spend the vacation being sad. I remembered staring at that sentence when it first arrived. I had closed the message and told myself she was uncomfortable with grief. Now I understood that she was uncomfortable with anything that did not center her. Even the rental car had been changed. I reserved a vehicle large enough for 4 passengers and luggage. Vanessa upgraded it to a luxury sport utility vehicle, then removed me as an authorized driver. In the notes, she wrote that I might not feel confident on unfamiliar roads. She never asked me. I had driven through winter storms in Ohio, managed family road trips across 5 states, and taken Richard to every medical appointment during the last year of his life. Yet Vanessa had reduced me to someone who needed permission to sit in a car I was paying for. I printed each change and arranged the pages in order. Seat assignment, hotel rooms, dinner cancellation, rental agreement,
Villa upgrade.
None of it was accidental. Daniel's name appeared on several confirmations. He had received copies. He had seen what she was doing. He had said nothing.
My phone buzzed on the desk.
For one foolish second, I thought it might be him calling to apologize. It was a message from Emily. She wrote that she was sorry and that she had wanted to tell me before they boarded. Then another message appeared. She said her mother had planned the cancellation days ago. A photograph followed. It was a screenshot from a private family conversation. Vanessa had written that once my flight was canceled, I would be too embarrassed to cause trouble. Beneath her message was a reply from Daniel. He had written only one sentence. Make sure she does not call the hotel. The sentence stayed on my screen long after the photograph finished loading. Make sure she does not call the hotel. Daniel had not been confused at the airport. He had not been caught between his wife and his mother. He had known exactly what was going to happen. I read the message again, hoping there was some explanation hidden inside those 7 words. There was none. My son had helped plan the moment when I would stand at the check-in counter with a packed suitcase and discover that my family had left me behind. Emily sent another message before I could respond. She said Vanessa had created a separate group conversation 2 nights earlier. The name of the conversation was Maui, without problems. I stared at those words until they seemed to lose their meaning. Emily apologized for not warning me sooner. She said her mother had taken her phone several times during the week and told her that adults were handling the travel arrangements. I wrote back that none of this was her fault. Then I asked her to send everything she had. The messages arrived one after another. Vanessa complained that I would slow them down, ask too many questions, and make Richard's birthday the center of the vacation. Daniel replied that the trip was supposed to help him relax before meeting a potential investor at the resort. That was the first time I learned about the meeting. He had never mentioned it to me. I had believed we were traveling to remember his father. Daniel saw it as a business opportunity paid for with his mother's savings. Vanessa wrote that canceling my ticket would solve both problems. They would keep the villa, avoid the memorial dinner, and give Daniel time to impress the investor without having to look after me. Look after me. I had watched Emily every weekday for 4 years while Daniel and Vanessa worked. I had driven Daniel to college when his car broke down, paid the repair bill, and sent him home with enough groceries to last a month. After Richard died, I loaned them money for a new roof because Vanessa said water was leaking near Emily's room. I later learned their insurance had covered most of the repair, but no one offered to return what I had given them. Each memory came back with a different shape now. The urgent calls. The affectionate invitations that always ended with a request. The family dinners where Vanessa placed a bill beside my plate and called it easier if I handled it. The times Daniel hugged me only after I agreed to help. I had mistaken access for closeness. I had believed they kept me involved because they needed me in their lives. They needed my bank account, my time, and my willingness to excuse them. Emily sent one final photograph. It showed a message from Vanessa written the night before our flight. She called me an embarrassment and said I would return home quietly because people my age feared being alone. Daniel responded with a thumbs-up symbol. That small mark hurt more than the longer messages. It required no anger, no explanation, and no hesitation. He had approved. I closed the conversation and placed my phone beside the printed documents. The house remained still around me. Richard's clock ticked on the wall. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Nothing outside me had changed, but something inside me had settled into place. For years, I had protected Daniel from the consequences of his choices. I had covered bills, softened disagreements, and pretended not to notice when gratitude became expectation. That protection ended at my desk that morning. I opened my address book and found the number for Thomas Reed, the attorney who had handled Richard's estate. When his assistant answered, I asked for the earliest available appointment. She offered the following week. I looked at the messages on my screen and told her the matter concerned unauthorized access to my accounts. She placed me on hold, then returned with an opening that afternoon. I gathered every page into a folder, added the screenshots Emily had sent, and wrote 3 words across the front in black ink. No more permission. Thomas Reed's office occupied the 4th floor of a brick building near downtown Columbus, the same place where Richard and I had signed our estate papers 11 years earlier. The waiting room had not changed. The chairs were still dark blue. The clock above the receptionist's desk still ran 2 minutes fast. I arrived 20 minutes early, with the folder resting on my lap, and watched people pass the glass doors outside. When Thomas called my name, he greeted me warmly, then stopped smiling when he saw the documents. He read the cancellation record first, then the villa charge, then every screenshot Emily had sent. He did not interrupt. He only turned each page carefully and placed it face down when he finished. Margaret, he said at last, how much access does Daniel have to your finances? I told him Daniel had once been listed as an emergency contact on several accounts. Richard had added him years ago in case one of us became ill. I believed that access had ended after the estate was settled. Thomas asked whether I had ever signed a durable power of attorney naming Daniel. I remembered signing several papers during the months after Richard died. When every envelope seemed to contain another form I did not have the strength to read twice. Thomas pulled up a copy from his records. Daniel had limited authority to communicate with the bank and manage travel benefits if I became unable to do so. The document did not allow him to spend my money for himself, but the bank had never received formal notice that the arrangement was no longer needed. That does not excuse what happened, Thomas said. It explains how it was possible. He called my bank while I sat across from him. A fraud specialist confirmed that Daniel's login credentials had been used 3 times during the previous month. One visit changed the notification settings on my travel card. Another approved the villa deposit. The third removed text alerts from my phone number. I listened without speaking. Daniel had not merely ignored Vanessa's plan. He had opened the door for it. Thomas asked whether I wanted to contact the authorities. I told him I wanted the accounts secured first. He nodded, and we worked through every step. Daniel's access was revoked. The secondary card in Vanessa's name was frozen. The pending charges connected to the resort were disputed. My travel points were transferred into a new account protected by a separate password. Thomas also prepared notices for the airline, the hotel, and the rental companies stating that no one had permission to make changes on my behalf. Then he opened my estate documents. Daniel was listed as the primary beneficiary. Vanessa would control the inheritance if Daniel could not. Emily's education fund was connected to the same trust. I had never questioned that structure because Richard and I believed our son would protect his daughter. Now I was not certain he would protect anything that stood between Vanessa and money. I asked Thomas to separate Emily's fund completely. He created instructions that would allow her to use it for college, housing, and approved educational expenses without either parent withdrawing from it. Then I changed the remainder of my estate. Daniel would no longer inherit automatically. Any future support would depend on conditions he could not alter, borrow against, or pressure someone else to release. Thomas looked at me before printing the final page. "Are you sure?" I thought of Daniel walking toward security while my suitcase remained beside me. I thought of the thumbs-up symbol beneath Vanessa's message. For the first time in years, I said, "I am sure." When I left the office, the afternoon sky had turned gray, and a light rain had begun to fall. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Daniel and 4 from Vanessa. I did not return them. I drove home, placed the new documents inside Richard's old fireproof box, and made myself a cup of tea. At 5:30, another call came through. This time Vanessa left a message. Her voice was no longer amused. The resort had declined their payment, the rental company had canceled their vehicle, and the villa manager was demanding a valid card before sunset. She said there had been a terrible misunderstanding. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and let the message end. They had reached Maui. Their money had not. Vanessa called again 12 minutes later. Then Daniel called. I let both calls pass while I stood at the kitchen counter and watched rain collect along the edge of the window. Their messages arrived in a predictable order. Vanessa began with confusion. Daniel began with irritation. By the 4th message, confusion had become accusation. Daniel said the resort was holding their luggage until they provided another card. He said Emily was tired, the rental car reservation had disappeared, and the family was stranded nearly 3,000 miles from home because I had overreacted. He never mentioned the canceled ticket. He never asked whether I had made it home safely. He only spoke about what my decision had cost him. At 6:15, Emily sent me a private message. She said the hotel had placed them in the lobby while her parents argued with the front desk. She had enough money saved on a prepaid card for food, but she was worried her mother would take it. I told her to keep the card with her and promised she would not be left without a safe place to sleep. Then I called the resort directly. I explained that Emily was a minor traveling with her parents and asked whether a standard room could be reserved in her name with access, controlled by the front desk. The manager said the room would still require an adult guest, so I paid for one basic room for all 3 of them for 2 nights. I did not restore the villa. I did not approve the luxury vehicle. I did not reopen the travel card. I covered only what was necessary to make sure my granddaughter was safe. 5 minutes after the reservation was confirmed, Vanessa called from Daniel's phone. I answered. "What have you done?" she asked. Her voice was tight and carefully lowered, as though she did not want the people in the lobby to hear. "I secured a room for Emily," I said. "You and Daniel may stay there as her guardians." "A standard room?" she said. "There are 3 of us." "Then you will have 3 people in a standard room." Silence followed. I could hear the soft music playing in the resort lobby and the distant murmur of guests checking in. Vanessa finally said the villa had already been promised to them. I reminded her that the villa had been charged to my account without my permission. She said families did not speak about permission when they helped one another. Families also do not cancel a mother's flight and use the refund to upgrade their vacation, I replied. Her voice sharpened. She said I was embarrassing Daniel in front of a potential investor. I asked whether that investor knew Daniel's mother had paid for the trip. She did not answer. Then Daniel took the phone. "Mom, fix this," he said. Those were his first words to me. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A command. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, at the screenshots showing his agreement, and at the copy of the banking record with his login attached to the villa charge. "I already fixed what belonged to me," I said. "Your accounts are no longer connected to mine." Daniel told me I was destroying a family vacation over a misunderstanding. I asked him to explain the misunderstanding.
He paused.
Then he said Vanessa believed I would be more comfortable at home. "So you canceled my ticket before sunrise?" I asked. Another pause. He said they had planned to tell me later. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny left. "You watched me stand at that counter," I said. "You knew before the agent spoke." Daniel lowered his voice and told me not to make the situation dramatic. I thought of all the years I had made his life easier by absorbing every inconvenience myself. I had paid quietly, forgiven quickly, and asked for less than I deserved. He had mistaken that for weakness. "You have a room for 2 nights, I told him. "After that, you will arrange your own accommodations and return flight." Vanessa spoke in the background, demanding the phone. Daniel said I could not abandon them in Hawaii. "You are not abandoned," I said. "You are simply paying for your own choices." I ended the call before he could respond. The phone remained silent for nearly an hour. Then Emily sent one final message. She said her father had been sitting alone in the lobby, staring at the floor, while Vanessa tried to call 3 different credit card companies. For the first time that day, Daniel was beginning to understand that my money had never been his safety net. It had been my generosity, and generosity could end. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and found 17 missed calls on my phone. Vanessa had left 5 messages, each more urgent than the last. Daniel had left 3. The remaining calls came from numbers I did not recognize. One belonged to the resort. Another belonged to the rental company. A third came from an airline representative asking whether I had authorized changes to 3 return tickets. I had not. Daniel and Vanessa were trying to come home early, but the original tickets had been purchased with points from my account. Once those points were transferred, the reservation could no longer be changed without my approval. I called the airline and explained that Emily was a minor and should not be separated from her parents. I authorized the release of her ticket information but refused responsibility for any additional charges. The representative confirmed that the family could return the following evening if Daniel paid the fare difference himself. It was almost $4,000. At 8:20, Daniel called again. This time, I answered. His voice sounded tired. He said Vanessa had spent most of the night contacting banks and asking friends for help. The investor had canceled their meeting after learning that Daniel could not cover a hotel deposit. Daniel blamed the resort for discussing private payment details near the lobby. I listened until he finished. Then I asked why the investor had believed Daniel was paying for the trip in the first place. He became quiet. I did not need an answer. The villa, the vehicle, and the expensive dinners were not only for Vanessa. They were part of a picture Daniel wanted to present. My money had been used to make him appear more successful than he was. "Mom, I made a mistake," he finally said. It was the closest he had come to admitting anything. "Which mistake?" I asked. "Canceling my ticket, using my account, or pretending my money was yours?" He said Vanessa had convinced him that I would understand. Later. I reminded him that his name appeared on the bank records and his words appeared in the messages. He could not place every decision at his wife's feet. Daniel sighed and said marriage required compromise. So does family, I said. You compromised me. He asked me to pay for the earlier flight home. I told him no. I had already covered the room to protect Emily. The rest belonged to him. His voice changed then, becoming colder. He said Richard would have been disappointed in me for leaving our son in trouble. For a moment, the kitchen seemed to disappear around me. Daniel had used his father's memory before, but never so openly. Richard had worked 2 jobs when Daniel was born. He had saved every spare dollar for college. He had taught our son that character mattered most when no one was watching. I looked toward Richard's empty chair at the table. Your father would be disappointed, I said quietly. But not in me. I ended the call. Later that afternoon, Emily messaged me from a small cafe near the resort. She said her parents had borrowed money from one of Daniel's coworkers for the return flight. They had also canceled every remaining activity. Vanessa blamed me whenever something went wrong. Daniel barely spoke. Emily asked whether she could stay with me for a few days after they returned. I told her my guest room was ready. That evening, the resort manager sent a final statement. The private villa had been canceled. The luxury vehicle had never left the rental lot. The dinner reservations were released. Every extravagant detail Vanessa had added disappeared within 24 hours of my account's closing. What remained was a standard room, 3 suitcases, and 2 adults learning the price of appearances. Their flight landed in Columbus late the following night. I did not go to the airport. Emily took a taxi to my house after sending me a message that she was on her way. Daniel and Vanessa went home alone. At 7 the next morning, my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw my son standing on the porch beside his wife. Vanessa held a thick envelope against her chest. Daniel looked exhausted. Neither of them had called first. They still believed they could arrive at my door, explain away the evidence, and return everything to the way it had been. I opened the door, but I did not invite them inside. Vanessa spoke first. We need to settle this before it gets any more embarrassing. She held the envelope as though it contained something official, but I could see the resort logo printed in one corner. Daniel stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets, avoiding my eyes. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Emily was asleep upstairs, and I would not allow their argument to enter the house where she had finally felt safe enough to rest. Vanessa handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of their hotel bill, the airfare difference, taxi receipts, and a handwritten total of $6,840. She had circled the number twice. This is what your little stunt cost us, she said. I looked through the pages slowly. Not one receipt showed a charge I had authorized. You canceled the villa, she continued. You ruined Daniel's meeting. You humiliated us in front of strangers. Daniel finally looked at me. Mom, we should go inside. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him. I placed the envelope on the small table beside the porch swing, then opened the folder I had brought outside. The first page was the airline cancellation record. The second was the account history showing Vanessa's email address. The third showed Daniel's login approving the villa deposit. I laid the screenshots from Emily's phone on top. Vanessa's expression changed when she saw them. Those messages were private, she said. She did not deny writing them. She only objected to my seeing them. Daniel reached for the pages, but I kept my hand resting on the folder. You called me a problem, I said. You planned to cancel my ticket. You used my money to impress someone you wanted to do business with. Then you watched me stand at the airport and pretended you knew nothing. Daniel said it had been Vanessa's idea. She turned toward him so quickly that even he seemed surprised. You agreed to everything, she said. You told me your mother would complain the entire trip.
There.
Excuses began crossing over each other. Vanessa blamed Daniel for needing the investor. Daniel blamed Vanessa for choosing the villa. Each sentence exposed another decision they had made together. I waited until they stopped. Then I removed the final document from the folder. It was the notice Thomas Reed had prepared, confirming that their financial access had been revoked and that my estate plan had been changed. Daniel read the first page twice. "You changed the trust?" he asked. "I protected it," I said. "Emily's education fund is separate now. Neither of you can withdraw from it." Vanessa stepped closer. "You cannot punish us by taking away Daniel's inheritance." "It was never Daniel's," I replied. "It was mine." She said families shared what they had. I reminded her that sharing required consent. Taking did not become generosity simply because the person being used remained silent. Daniel's anger faded as he looked through the documents. For the first time, he seemed to understand that there would be no quick apology followed by another transfer, no promise that restored his access, and no conversation where I accepted the blame to keep everyone comfortable. "Are you cutting me out of your life?" he asked.
His voice was softer now.
"I am cutting you out of my accounts," I said. "What happens to our relationship depends on what you do without access to them." Vanessa called that cruel. I looked at the woman who had smiled while I was left at the airport and felt no need to defend myself. "Cruel would have been leaving Emily without a room," I said. "I made sure she was safe. You made sure I was gone." Daniel asked whether Emily could come home. I told him she would decide when she felt ready and that he could speak with her without pressure or blame. Vanessa objected, saying I was turning their daughter against them. I opened the front door. "The truth does not need my help," I said. "It has already done that." They remained on the porch for another moment, waiting for the old version of me to return. The woman who would soften her words, write a check, and apologize for making them uncomfortable. She did not return. I picked up the envelope of their expenses and handed it back to Vanessa. "These belong to you," I said. Then I stepped inside and closed the door. For several weeks after that morning, the house felt different. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. Emptiness had followed Richard's death, settling into every room like winter air. Quiet was something I chose. Emily stayed with me for 6 days before returning home. During that time, we cooked dinner together, watched old movies, and spoke carefully about what had happened. I never asked her to choose between her parents and me. She had already been placed in the middle of too many adult decisions. I told her she could love them and still recognize when they were wrong. Before she left, I gave her a key to my house and reminded her that my door would remain open. Daniel did not contact me for nearly a month. Vanessa sent 2 emails during the first week. The first demanded repayment for their expenses. The second accused me of damaging their reputation. I forwarded both to Thomas and did not respond. The silence that followed was not punishment. It was a boundary. I had spent too many years believing that peace required my surrender. I was learning that real peace sometimes required a locked account, an unanswered message, and the courage to let other people remain unhappy with me. 2 months later, Daniel came to see me alone. He stood on the porch without luggage, paperwork, or requests. He looked older than he had at the airport. He said he had started meeting with a counselor and had taken a second job to repay the money he borrowed for the return flight. He did not ask me to restore his access. He did not blame Vanessa. He only said that he had confused my support with something he was entitled to use. I listened. Then I told him trust could not be repaired by one conversation. He nodded. That was the first honest thing between us in a long time. We began slowly. A phone call once a week. Coffee in a public place. No financial questions. No discussions about inheritance. Vanessa did not join us. I did not ask her to. By early spring, The travel account was secure, Emily's education fund was protected, and every disputed charge had been resolved. The airline restored the value of my canceled ticket. The resort returned the unauthorized villa deposit. When the final credit appeared on my statement, I did not feel triumphant. I felt free. Nora Bennett had been my closest friend since our children attended elementary school. When I told her I still wanted to visit Maui, she opened her calendar and said she had been waiting 30 years for someone to ask. We booked 2 economy seats, a small hotel near the beach, and a compact rental car. No private villa.
No luxury upgrades.
No one controlling the itinerary except us. 3 months later, Nora and I boarded a morning flight from Columbus. I carried the same blue suitcase Richard had given me. This time, when the agent scanned my boarding pass, the machine gave a soft chime and the screen turned green. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then I walked forward. Maui was warmer than I expected. The air smelled of salt, flowers, and rain. On Richard's birthday, Nora and I rose before dawn and drove toward the coast. Emily had mailed me a small envelope containing a photograph of Richard laughing beside our old station wagon. I placed it on the sand beside a white flower and watched the sun lift over the water. I did not make a speech. Richard had never cared for grand speeches. I simply thanked him for the life we had built and promised that I would stop confusing sacrifice with love. Later that morning, Nora took a photograph of me standing near the shoreline with my shoes in one hand and the ocean behind me. I posted it with a single sentence. The trip was never canceled. I only stopped traveling with people who wanted me left behind. Daniel called that evening. He said the photograph was beautiful. Then he told me he was sorry without adding an excuse. I accepted the apology, but I did not erase what had happened. Forgiveness did not require forgetting. Love did not require access. Family did not require me to finance my own humiliation. They had believed I would remain at home because they had decided I did not belong beside them. Instead, I crossed the ocean without them. For the first time in years, no one else chose my seat, my room, my destination, or my worth.